Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to this webinar hosted by the Mekong Club. We are very fortunate today to have two guest speakers joining us from BSR. Claudio is the Associate Director of Human Trafficking and Forced Labour, and Alice is a Human Rights Manager. We're really very excited to hear about the amazing work that BSR are doing to further the empowerment and employment of human trafficking survivors today. Just a quick note to remind you guys, please keep your lines on mute. If you have any questions for the speakers, we will have plenty of time at the end of the session to address those. Feel free to pop them into the chat box or message them to me privately, and I'll make sure that we get through them all before the session ends. So with that, I will first pass over to CEO of the Mekong Club, Matt Freeman.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm going to read out the title again because there's some really important words here that will be addressed in due time. Empowerment and employment, how business can support survivors of human trafficking. And I'm hoping at the end of this, for those of you who are listening, if you can think of how your organization could be a part of this process, I think that would be great if you're able to be a part of this. I first want to thank my team, Phoebe and Kat, for helping to set this up. I want to also thank Claudio and Alice for doing this presentation, but I also want to say a little bit about my own experiences over the last 30 years related to this topic. You know, oftentimes when we address human trafficking, you have victims that end up in shelters and they get care there. They get counseling and health care and assessments and various other things, but it doesn't always extend beyond that. And as a result of that, we find that a certain percentage of victims end up getting re-victimized. In fact, when I was in South Asia, it was about 40%. And so a lot of people who went into a trafficking situation never had the situation that allowed them to be trafficked be resolved. And as a result of that, re-trafficking takes place. A lot of that also has to do with the fact that they are looking for a way of supporting themselves, and people come and deceive and trick them, and that results in them maybe accepting a second or a third offer that results in a problem taking place. But during this time, we've seen certain approaches that have been used. When I was in Nepal, one of the things that you would have as a standard part of a shelter is a sewing class. Now, the difficulty with that is that they had the right idea, teach victims of human trafficking to sew, but in reality, when they went into the real world and they had to compete with the tailors who had been there for a long time, it didn't work. And so in some ways, these programs didn't turn out to be successful. I saw programs in Nepal where frontline workers, a person who had been trafficked, would be assigned on the border to look for possible traffickers taking girls across the border. They got paid for that. They were part of an NGO. It was a good use of their kind of skills because they knew enough to know how to pick somebody out. I've seen people work in coffee shops where they were trained after they came back, and nobody knew they were trafficking victims, but this allowed them to get a different type of income coming in. I worked with an organization in India that initially had trafficking victims working in hotels, but unfortunately it didn't work out. And it's partly because these women were being hit on a regular basis. And so it was dangerous for them and for the hotel. And so a telemarketer came and said, can I use them in my telemarketing business to sell soap and shampoo and various other things? So he hired about 20 of these women and trained them, and as a result of this process, they were very successful. And it's partly because they were forced to sell themselves, so they learned how to market. You know, for better or worse, they learned particular skills. The telemarketing was independent of them being around anybody. They made good sales commissions. It turned out to be successful. So it's really important to make sure you link people up with the right type of thing. Other types of things that we've seen here in Asia are banks helping ex-trafficking victims to get bank accounts, because sometimes if they find that they were arrested as a result of a process, that resulted in them not being able to get bank accounts or legal support to remove records related to prostitution. The point is that there are things that businesses can do, and you'll hear about this in great detail. The reason why I feel that this is so important is that when you're a trafficking victim, you shouldn't have like V on your forehead that indicates that you are a victim for life. You went through a bad experience. That does not define who you are and your abilities and skills. So getting a job like this gives them confidence and self-esteem. It allows them to get money to come in, and it acts as a role model for others who might follow in their shoes. It makes a difference in a person's life. So I'm really excited to hear what we're going to hear today. I've seen the slides. I have a general sense of what is being done by BSR and GBCAT. I really hope you look at this and think about this from the perspective of how perhaps your organization might get involved. And with that, I'll hand it over to the presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matt, Phoebe, and Kat for this wonderful introduction, Matt. Really great testimony and very practical, solid personal experiences that really set up nicely here. I am thrilled to be here. Greetings to everyone. A couple of words about ourselves. As you heard, I'm the Associate Director for Human Trafficking and Forced Labor at Business for Social Responsibility. I'm based in Paris. And we have a dedicated modern slavery team at BSR, working with our global network of companies and members on these topics. And we do engage on our collaborative initiatives, such as GBCAT. We are delighted to partner with the Mekong Club. It's an organization that we greatly value and appreciate. And thank you so much for providing the opportunity to speak on such an important topic. Before we start, I'll just turn briefly to my great colleague, Alice, just to say hi and introduce herself. Alice, over to you.
Thanks, Claudia, and thanks to the Mekong Club for facilitating this session. My name is Alice Pease. I am based in BSR's Paris office. I'm the manager of the Global Business Coalition Against Human Trafficking, which we'll go on to talk about in more depth. I have a background in modern slavery. Before joining BSR 2.5 years ago, I worked in the British Parliament on a campaign to strengthen the UK's Modern Slavery Act. So whilst at BSR, I've worked on the human rights team and more specifically with our members on anti-trafficking issues. So Claudio, do you want to run through the agenda, and then I'll...
Absolutely. So we put a good program up, and we'll be talking a little bit about what it means for businesses to engage in this topic and really support survivors and preventing this re-exploitation, re-victimization that Matt hinted at. We'll look through some concrete practical case studies of how businesses engage in this topic, and we'll overview on the steps that your business can take to get started. And then we'll be opening for questions, comments, remarks from the floor. Without further ado, Alice, maybe you can give us a quick glance over the work of GBCAT.
Absolutely. So GBCAT is a cross-sector collaboration of businesses that are committed to leadership on anti-trafficking and modern slavery. We are a small but mighty group, and you'll see our members in the bottom right-hand side. So we have Google, Coca-Cola, Carlson, and Boost engagement. And GBCAT was founded in around 2010, and BSR took over the secretariat in around 2017. The idea when GBCAT was founded was not to duplicate the efforts of other anti-trafficking groups, but really to identify where there were gaps and how the group could support businesses to further their anti-trafficking efforts. So once an initial landscape analysis was done, the group identified really 3 key areas where BSR and GBCAT could improve cross-sector collaboration and develop really resources and work which hadn't yet been done. So the first of these is on survivor empowerment and employment, which is the focus of today's webinar. GBCAT also works on SME capacity building, so really supporting our members to develop accessible and right-sized information on anti-trafficking for their corporate suppliers, not just in Europe and the US, but across different geographies, including Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And then the third axis of our work is on providing the right guidance for businesses, and that includes tools, trainings, and organizations. And GBCAT has been one of the partners to develop what we call the Modern Slavery Map, which is a sort of global database of organizations which work on anti-trafficking, which I'll go on to explain a little bit later on. So on the next slide, you'll see a summary of those 3 key areas of work, and we aim to not work individually, but really to collaborate with other organizations, and hence this joint webinar with the Mekong Club today. So today's webinar, as I mentioned, is really going to be focused on our work on survivor empowerment and employment. So we have decided to focus on this area because we saw that there were a lot of businesses focused on prevention, mitigation, and remedy, but that businesses weren't thinking holistically about what comes next. So the work that we've done in the last 2 to 3 years has really been focused on how can businesses proactively support human rights and the human rights of survivors of human trafficking. So we discovered that really, there were a lot of businesses who were just about starting to think about this very important piece of the puzzle, but that really sort of some introductory and level setting was needed in terms of, what initiatives are out there, what are the first steps that businesses need to take when they're starting to think about this issue. And so with this in mind, we developed what we think is the first kind of comprehensive guide for businesses on the empowerment and employment of survivors of human trafficking. So you'll see that on the top left. That's the guide, and it's freely accessible on GBCAT's website. All of our materials are open source, so you can access them on our website. But most of the content that we'll talk through today is really based on that guide, and we'll go through what's the business case for companies starting to think about survivor empowerment and employment. What are those key considerations they need to think about in terms of looking for partnerships, and what are those first steps to get businesses started. So we'll cover all of those in more detail today. But I just wanted to flag that, you don't need to take notes, because in addition to the recording of the webinar, you can refer to the material in that guide. GBCAT has also developed a trauma-informed company training. So this is really, when a company has decided that it will introduce a survivor empowerment and employment program, it needs to capacitate staff to be able to respond, recognize, and identify instances of trauma. So this is a four parts module, which is designed for people managers so that they can identify trauma, they can understand some of the experiences that survivors of human trafficking may have experienced, and they have the knowledge to be able to respond to some of these instances. So again, that's available on our website, and we'll go on to talk about it in more detail in a minute. So with that introduction, I'll pass it back to Claudio to take us through the role of business in supporting and preventing re-exploitation.
Great, thank you, Alice. Now that we really set the stage and the framework in which we operate, let's look at the positive role that businesses can really exercise to empower survivors and contribute to restore not just their rights, but justice overall. But first things first, it's important a conversation of this nature cannot disregard the importance of understanding what it means for a person to be trafficked, the experiences and the needs that the traffic victim has endured. You're certainly aware human trafficking remains highly pervasive as a crime and really thrives off root causes such as poverty, lack of education, opportunities, from marginalized communities, and no country unfortunately is immune to that. But what does it mean for a person to be trafficked? Well, survivors commonly experience severe trauma, which profoundly affects and impacts their mental and physical health and their rehabilitation. This trauma can arise from multiple factors such as and can manifest itself in the loss of identity, sense of safety, and most importantly, the ability to trust others. That's why human trafficking is such a hidden and often unreported crime. So recognizing the trauma that the person has endured is a very fundamental and critical step to be able to tailor programs that are around their needs. And as Matt has mentioned, the primary concern for survivor intervention measure is that of a protection. So really providing with the medical and psychological needs. But there's a strong evidence that steady employment and stable financial situation really is the critical factor that positively contribute toward the empowerment of a survivor over the long term. So if you go to the next slide, we can look at the why business should care and should invest. What's the positive effect of a program that empowers survivors and contribute to their employment? You're certainly familiar with the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights framework, which requires businesses to identify, prevent, and mitigate, and possibly eliminate negative effects of human trafficking, human rights impacts overall. But many businesses have recognized that there is an opportunity there to go beyond respecting human rights and really to support the advancement of such human rights. And there's three main ways in which empowerment of survivors can demonstrate that. Well, first, it's a real tangible commitment to actively contribute to prevent what we have talked about in terms of re-victimization. Many businesses have a public commitment to prevent human trafficking. However, to date, most businesses have not really capitalized on the opportunity to hire survivors of human trafficking at those most at risk of re-exploitation. Secondly, it really provides an opportunity for businesses to support the good organizations out there that are making a meaningful impact in supporting the rehabilitation of survivors, such as social enterprises, vocational training organizations. They offer a positive, impactful way for businesses to partner with and to invest in for the benefit of communities. And lastly, really creates a productive, empathetic work environment wherever you have a situation where a business adopts a trauma-informed approach that helps foster this workplace culture with great empathy that is beneficial not just to survivors, but really to the culture of the organization, to all workers. And here we really like this quote, which we think is really powerful, by the National Survivors Network's Resilience Voices. I'll take a moment just to read it for you. Empowering individuals to think of themselves as gifted, motivated survivors that might have otherwise thought of themselves as disadvantaged, inspiring the true agency required to effect change in one's own life and one's community. I think this is really an example of what we talk about at the beginning with Matt, right? That we commonly understand that the primary need of a person is their immediate protection concerns, or that of seeing their perpetrators convicted. Absolutely critical, absolutely fundamental. But in all encounters with survivors, the primary need is to really build the long-term solution to their rehabilitation. And that goes into really providing opportunities for employment. So here at the macro level, two types of support that businesses can provide. There's direct support. So explore opportunities to provide direct qualified survivors with access to internship, for example, or jobs at businesses with their own organization, or work with key business partners and trust suppliers. but also through establishing employment programs in partnership with a number of service providers or vocational training organizations. But there is also indirect support that businesses can provide, and through organizations such as immediate needs providers and service providers working with victims. And possible interventions there include providing the financial and advocacy assistance to these organizations that work closely with survivors on day-to-day basis, offering pro bono legal advice, for example, or relevant industry training, and investing in their own opportunities of internship placement, coaching, or professional development. So again, here in the next slide, we have an overview of the three main types of organization that can support survivors, that can work with businesses along these initiatives. And some organizations may provide financial support, for example, for basic needs like translation services or other types of services, substance abuse services. Others may offer legal services to survivors, for example, help them navigate the complex laws, immigration laws, applying for specific visas, or initiate legal proceedings against perpetrators of exploitation. Many service providers also work closely with law enforcement. They form the backbone of the national anti-trafficking protection and referral system in many countries. So they do provide training to law enforcement and responders on the ground on how to effectively identify victims of human trafficking. Business can contribute to those initiatives. There are ones that provide technical and training skills, others professional development and life skills, like how to communicate effectively, plan for the future, invest in their language skills, in the financial literacy, and so on. So really, some social enterprises have been also established specifically to provide on-job training, work experience, and employment. So let's look at some of the case studies, and I'll pass on again to Alice.
Thanks, Claudia. So I'm going to run us through three amazing companies and organizations that have implemented a survivor empowerment and employment program. So we want to show you that this is possible. This is not just an aspiration, and that there are companies that really are doing this. So we've chosen three organizations. The first is called Outland Denim, which is an Australian denim company which makes jeans. The second is a program called Bright Future, which is a UK-based initiative which offers internships to survivors of human trafficking. And the third is an LA-based social enterprise which offers software development and training for survivors of human trafficking. Now, there's some key differences between all of these organizations. Their business model is different. So, we have some examples of a social enterprise, others of for-profit businesses which are implementing these programs. Also a difference in geography. So, we're covering Cambodia, UK, and the US, and also differences in industry. So we've got one example from the tech industry, another from apparel, and the third is from food and agriculture. But I think it's important to think about what the commonalities are between these three different organizations. And I think we've picked out three common themes. The first is that these businesses can't do it alone. They rely very heavily on a close partnership with NGOs and organizations which directly support survivors. So Claudio's just run us through those types of organizations, immediate need providers, and vocational training organizations. The second key common factor is that they have a trauma-informed approach in how they address supporting survivors of human trafficking, which we'll go on to talk about in more depth in the coming slides. And I think the third really key piece is that these organizations and businesses are focused not just on providing a one-off opportunity, but really in developing the professional and personal skills and offering training so that, you know, whether or not these survivors stay in the business long term, they are equipped to take on other roles across different organizations. So to turn now to our first organisation, Outland Denim. That is an Australian-based company which crafts premium denim products and employs victims of human trafficking and other human rights abuses. It is Australian, but it has two facilities in Cambodia, which employ around 100 employees. Outland Denim has a really innovative and frankly exciting approach to survivor empowerment and employment. It has a kind of 4-pillar approach to its work, which is focused on opportunity, living wage, cross-training, and education. So if we turn to the first opportunity, Outland Denim provides employment for survivors of human trafficking and other forms of abuse. So in their facilities in Cambodia, around 15% of employees have been referred directly by anti-trafficking organizations, and a further 75% have suffered abuse of some form. In terms of training, cross-training, the way in which Outland Denim is very innovative is that it offers a 2-year program that enables employees and trainees to gain really an in-depth knowledge in the areas of cutting, finishing, and sewing. It offers training on all of these different elements. So, you know, there's no focus on just developing skills in one area, but really enabling employees to have that full and deep knowledge across the whole fabrication process. And then in terms of living wage, the organization offers a living wage, and it has a robust methodology about how to calculate it. It consults with external organizations, assesses the companies and the cost of living in its different geographies, and it offers 100% of its employees a living wage. It also offers training on budgeting and financial management, which is a key element. And then the fourth element is a focus on education. So it's training not just on financial management, but also on anti-trafficking, language skills, English lessons are provided. And key is also training for supervisors and people managers on trauma-informed approaches. So in terms of, you know, what the impact of Outland Denim is, I think that this is a company which is actually trying to quantify in a more robust way its impact. And so it produces an annual impact report, and I picked out some key figures. The first is that 85% of staff who were formerly at risk have reported a reduced risk of exploitation after just 6 months of employment. So I think that's a key figure. The second figure which I wanted to share is that between 2016 and 2020, the company has estimated that it has directly supported more than 750 employees and their direct relatives and communities. So big impact there. And then the third statistic is around sharing of education. So close to 90% of their employees in Cambodia have reported that they've shared some of the training that they've had access to with their community. So we can see that, you know, there's an impact not just for the individuals who are directly employed by Outland Denim, but also the communities that it touches. So turning now to the UK, we've got our second initiative that we want to showcase is called Bright Future. And Bright Future is an initiative which was created originally by a supermarket group called the Co-op to offer paid work placements leading to a non-competitive interview. So the placements are originally are 4 weeks long, and all candidates are guaranteed a job interview following their placement. Typically, the placements occur in either the retail stores or in the distribution centres. There's a sort of application process, and Bright Future works very closely with a number of NGOs that have direct experience of supporting victims and survivors, and they are referred directly to Bright Future. I think it's important to say for all of these organizations that not every survivor is suited to the work opportunities offered by these organizations, and that there are also sort of practical and legal considerations such as the right to work. But working with partners is a really crucial step in order to identify the right candidate with the right competencies. So the interesting thing about the Bright Future initiative is that it was so successful with the co-op that it has evolved into a multi-partner initiative with nearly close to 50 businesses and charities participating from across the UK. And it's spun out to become its own cooperative enterprise in 2020. And you'll see in the bottom bullet a list of some of the businesses that are participating in the scheme from across sectors. So we have the co-op, Body Shop, Dixon's Carving Warehouse, and Sir Robert McAlpine, which is a construction company. So I want to share on the next slide 2 quotes, one from the survivor perspective, the candidate perspective. So I'll just read it out, and then another from the business perspective. So the candidate who's taken part in Bright Future has said of the programme, "I would like to thank the co-op for all their help. This is a new chance and a new life. I am now able to settle in the UK. I have a partner and we are looking forward to our future. I am very happy to have been given this chance." So as we've talked about earlier, this is really about providing opportunities which are not just short term, but really have an impact in the long term of survivors. And then to have the business perspective on what this initiative has brought to Carving Warehouse in this case. We have a quote here from Simon Murray, who has said, "As a business, we have the opportunity to be a force for good, to have purpose beyond profit, and Bright Future is a way for us to do that, just that. It has the support of our board and executive management, right down to the teams that work with the candidates on a day-to-day basis." So I think that buy-in from all levels is absolutely crucial, and it's something that we'll go on to talk about in a few minutes. So now to our third example of a company that has adopted a survivor and empowerment program. This is an LA-based software social enterprise called Annie Cannons, which trains survivors of human trafficking and gender-based violence to become software engineers and entrepreneurs. Similarly to the Bright Future initiative, it works very closely with survivor organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area who refer eligible candidates to the program. There's then a sort of a test and a sort of initiation program to test whether the survivors are suitable and have the right commitment. This is followed by a 6-month boot camp, which includes training on coding and all sorts of different tech training, such as courses on HTML, JavaScript, and machine learning. Following that 6-month period, suitable participants are invited to do project-based work to hone their skills and become workforce ready. And once they have completed that, they are offered work as employees or subcontractors in Annie Cannons Impact Agency. I think one of the elements which is really exciting about this program is that it not only offers survivors the chance to have a steady income and a flexible work environment, but we've seen an example of program participants developing an app for other survivors of human trafficking to help them, to take them through the initial steps of applying for legal residency. So, we're seeing examples of survivors really working with communities and for their communities, thanks to these programs and opportunities which are offered to them. So now, if you're thinking, wow, this is something that sounds very worthwhile, and I want to get involved and get my business committed to this program, then we will spend the next couple of minutes discussing what you practically need to do to get get started on this. So we've set out 5 key steps which businesses who are considering starting a survivor empowerment and employment program need to consider. So the first is to conduct an internal readiness assessment. So this is really about 2 things. The first is about identifying whether the suitable buy-in exists within the organization. Is the support from senior management, which I just mentioned? Is the support from the right teams? So human resources would be a key team, but other business units which you identify as well. And then the second step is identifying what are the potential barriers to employing survivors. So this can be a number of potential challenges that may limit the prospects of survivors obtaining safe work, such as, the fact that they may not have, they may have interrupted work experience, they might not have the right references, and they may have missing documentation. So as a business, you need to really think about, what are those challenges and how can we get around those? There's probably a solution, but if you find that there are barriers which are insurmountable, then your organization may not be the right one to adopt a survivor empowerment and employment program. The second step is to determine what job opportunities are available. So this is about considering, if you're a global operation, which geographies may be suited to having a survivor empowerment and employment program. It's recommended that you implement a program in a geography where you know that human trafficking is a serious issue, although, as we know, it's an issue across all geographies. But is there a specific geography where you feel as though it makes sense from not just a business point of view, but also from a supporting survivors viewpoint? You also need to establish which are the departments and job units where job opportunities are available and where the skills of survivors would match the skills required. So there's no point creating job opportunities which you can't then fill, and that's where having a conversation with a scoping conversation with partners to identify what is the level of ability and what are the skills of some survivors in terms of what you're offering. And I think the point that Matt made in his opening around, survivors do have lots of skills, and they have past experiences which can make them very suited to certain roles is key. Then the third step is around finding trusted partners. So we've touched on this, but really it's not an exercise that you can do alone. You need to look for appropriate immediate needs providers and potentially vocational training organizations who can help you to identify survivors who are ready to work and ensure that they have the right skills and competencies for the job. Ideally, these organizations also support survivors throughout their employment journey with you, because it's important to have that follow through and for survivors to have avenues outside of work that they can lean on in those initial months. The fourth step is around conducting due diligence on relevant departments and business units. We know that survivors need a safe environment and one which is suited to having experienced trauma, and so ensuring that the environment is right and that there's no history of abuse or misconduct is a key exercise to do internally. And then the fifth step that we've identified is really to educate departments and people managers on trauma. As a business, you want to create the right environment for survivors of trauma, and this includes training on what is trauma, how to identify it, and how to equip people managers to deal with potential signals of trauma in the workplace. I'm going to just touch now on a couple of those points, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A, as I think I can see several messages in the chat. So in terms of what to look for in partners of survivor employment, we have identified some foundational elements and also some best practice elements, and then some specific criteria to look for when engaging with immediate needs providers and vocational training organizations. So in terms of foundational elements, credibility is key. So can the partner offer evidence of its legitimacy by furnishing the right documents and references, other previous clients that the organization has worked with that you can consult and assess their credibility based on those conversations and that documentary evidence. The second foundational element, which we've touched on, is does the organization adopt a trauma-informed approach to its counseling and training? And the third element is, does the organization have written guidelines which require prospective employees to submit background checks and which prohibit sexual and other forms of harassment in the workplace? In terms of best practice element, ideally you will find partners who don't just work alone, but work in collaboration with a whole network of partners to pair businesses with interested and qualified survivors. As we've seen, not all candidates will be suitable for all jobs, and so casting the net wide and having not just one partner, but a network of partners is a really important step. And the co-op, which the Best Bright Future initiative, which I mentioned earlier on, has, in the early stages of that program, there were, I think, 5 different organizations, NGO partners that were involved. So casting, as I said, the more partners that are credible and reliable, the better. And then an additional best practice element is that the organization in question has an effective complaints mechanisms where concerns and grievances can be raised. In terms of specific criteria for immediate needs providers, there's some practical considerations here, such as does the organization have the appropriate language skills to support survivors? Does it offer practical and financial support to survivors? And are the case managers skilled, and will they provide support after the period of employment has started? Vocational training organizations should offer free and affordable training, be aware of community-based services and resources for survivors, and also, practically they should be in a location which is close to get to, easily accessible for survivors. If you're thinking that all sounds great, but where do I start to look for these partners? The good news is that GBCAT has worked with a number of different organizations, including the ILO Global Business Network on Forced Labour, the IOM and Alliance 8.7, to develop what we have here, which is called the Modern Slavery Map, which is a tool to identify anti-trafficking organizations that businesses can partner with on their efforts. So it's not just for survivor empowerment and employment, it's also for prevention, identification and remediation. So for any of your anti-trafficking needs, this is a good reference point. And for survivor and empowerment and employment, you'll find that there are around 70 organizations which are listed that can support businesses on survivor empowerment and employment across the world. There's some key considerations for businesses who want to develop a robust approach to survivor empowerment and employment. And you'll see we've highlighted 3 on this slide. The first is in providing safe and appropriate employment opportunities. That readiness assessment that I talked about earlier should include an assessment of whether survivors are ready to work and interested in taking on the work on a part-time or full-time basis, depending on their availability. The position which is offered should be a long-term role, ideally, but can include a sort of shorter term opportunity initially, which allows for career advancement. The position should also offer competitive pay and enable survivors to cover basic needs. And there's some crucial considerations initially to take into account, such as, as can the business pay for any equipment upfront so that the survivor doesn't have to incur any costs before starting on the placement. There's some practical considerations around removing or making optional questions regarding an applicant's criminal record, and also, as we've mentioned before, having the right safeguards in place and written policies on sexual harassment and other forms of harassment. Another key consideration is to offer appropriate vocational and professional development opportunities. So survivors should be trained so that they have the right skills and background needed to succeed in the work placement. Survivors should also be trained and be able to develop additional professional skills so that they can more confidently integrate in the workplace. And this is all part of the sort of holistic long-term approach to employing survivors. And then the final one, which I think we've talked about, is to adopt a trauma-informed approach to employment. So businesses should be aware that any transition to work is difficult, but it's particularly difficult in this instance, and colleagues need to be equipped to support their managees and their colleagues to respond to trauma. So what do we mean by trauma-informed approach and trauma-informed supervision? This is really an acknowledgement of the inherent power of the supervisory role and the balance of power between supervisors and those they supervise. So trauma-informed supervision focuses on employee safety. It values transparency and trust building, promotes collaboration to reach consensus, fosters peer support, empowers through voice and choice, and acknowledges the inherent power of the supervisory role. I mentioned at the start that GBCAT has actually developed a trauma-informed training, so this is a great place to start, and it's really intended to provide that element of training on trauma-informed approach. So recommend you take a look at that. And then we've been talking about the key considerations for the business as a whole, but what are those 3 key considerations for supervisors and people managers who have the day-to-day interaction with the program participants? So the first is confidentiality. Crucial not to share the personal backgrounds of individuals and the reasons why they are taking part in the employment program unless it's strictly necessary. People managers should also treat any sensitive conversations as confidential. And if people managers do need to share information, they should check first with their managee around whether they're comfortable with disclosing that information. The second issue regards communication. So, there's a lot of evidence which shows that survivors don't necessarily want to be labelled as survivors or victims, so people managers should avoid using those terms. Many survivors are trying to move on from past experiences, and being defined by these events is counterproductive to their healing and recovery journey. And then finally, considerations around safety. So I think we've talked about this, but really it's about creating a safe environment to prevent colleagues who have experienced trauma from feeling not just physically insecure, but also having the emotional safety net. So I'm conscious that we want to leave some time for questions. So I think I'll stop there and open the floor up for some discussion.
Thank you so much, Alice and Claudio and Matt, for sharing. So just a reminder to pop questions into the chat if you have any. Claudio, David has put an excellent couple of questions into the chat. I'll just read them out for the sake of those that can't see what David's written. So he's curious as to whether there's any data on how survivors feel being called survivors as a terminology. Does this term benefit our sector more than the employees, and may it stigmatize them against future employment opportunities? And then secondly, do we think that maybe the use of the term survivor might come with a type of weight which may actually go against those businesses trying to engage in these types of programs? So maybe would governments kind of be reluctant to use this term or see this term as it implies a potentially deadly scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, David. the term, there's no, I guess there's no perfect solution, you know, when it comes to definitions and terminologies, and but on the question on survivor, this is certainly a preferred term versus the term of victim. This is what we heard a lot, and what has been pointed out by organizations that include activists and survivors of trauma and that crime. It's a preferred term versus actually labeling a person as a victim. Survivor, it's a positive term in that respect, that gives a better perspective of rehabilitation to the concerned individual, rather than being labeled as a victim. In fact, when you mention governments, we understand that it can be problematic for legal. From a legal standpoint, because of the international definition of human trafficking, actually. So the United Nations Protocol against trafficking in persons talks about victim, and that has been reflected into and transferred into national legislation. So we'll see a lot of the domestic legal framework around human trafficking is built on the concept of a victim. So that's where actually from the legal standpoint, governments and national authorities may not have a preference for that because of the legal implication in their jurisdictions. So again, there's no perfect way to do this, but you will see a number of advisory councils that have been created in the last few years and have been supported by governments and civil society alike. And these are survivor advisory councils and organizations. So of people that have endured such trauma and became good advocate and great activists and experts on the subject matter. So that you will see a lot. And let me say that it's also a type of initiative that it's still at its infancy. So everything we can do to support such organizations will really make a meaningful impact now, to build on the good promising practices in this space. Lots of the responses to human trafficking in the last 20 years have focused on criminal justice responses, on prosecuting, investigating cases, on conviction, even though convictions are extremely low globally. But there is a really an important need now to focus on the next step, on a more forward-looking step that is really empowering the people that endure such trauma and rehabilitated them in a meaningful, sustainable manner. So we talk about a lot, and maybe Alice wants to chip in that. We talk about really trauma-informed, rights-based responses, and this is so important, right? It's so important to, whenever your business engages in these critical programs, to build programs that are not just for the victims, but they are around the victim, and to really take into the equation the concerns and the needs of the people that we ultimately serve. But that doesn't discourage you. It shouldn't discourage you to do that, because there is a wealth of organizations out there that can help you in this journey.
I was just going to add, Claudia, that I very much agree with all those points, and I think it's interesting to see, once a business has started to implement these programs, the shift in language. So you'll see that survivors are referred to more as candidates, employees, and that's a crucial distinction, which I touched upon, but really important to once the building blocks are in place, to perhaps use terminology which doesn't differentiate survivors from their colleagues.
Thank you both. And Alice, are there any other kind of cautionary tales or common mistakes that businesses may make in this space, and how can these mistakes be avoided?
It's a very good question. I think maybe the cautionary tale is really around one of the points that I made earlier around buy-in. So, what we've seen is there's a lot of enthusiasm, but this work requires really a cross-functional approach across teams. You need to have the support of human resources, of individual departments, of management. And I think taking the time to really build the consensus in the organization, so that, this is a program which not just an individual believes in, but the whole company believes in, is really important and worth taking time over. We've seen from the co-op, it's really a program which had a huge amount of support across different levels, across different functions, and it's important to build that so that the people who are day-to-day managing candidates and survivors are interested in that piece of professional development, but then there's also the right funding, the resources allocated to making it happen. So I'd say it's absolutely achievable, but taking time to go through those steps that I mentioned is key.
And certainly seeing the real life case studies that you guys have shared today has been really, really helpful. So we look forward to seeing many more of these in the coming future. So Claudio, I have one more question for you around kind of the right conditions for this type of program. So are there any kind of particular countries or particular industries where you'd recommend that conditions are very well suited for a business that's kind of new to survivor employment?
Yeah, we've seen a bunch of case studies, and Alice gone through those. I'd say that really any industry is suitable to start off on this. Nothing prevents to any environment is suitable for these individuals to grow their skills, to learn functions, cross-sectoral functions, regardless of the nature of the business itself. There's a great deal of an amount of things that can be learned as a job function and human resources function, for example, planning, coordination functions, business relationships. So I wouldn't. We have seen a bunch of these cases, and I'm really encouraged to have a cross-sectoral approach there. There are pioneering countries that we have seen, North America, UK, for example, but really any region can offer these opportunities. As we have seen, unfortunately, human trafficking is really a pervasive crime. It happens everywhere. No country is immune. So there's plenty of opportunities there to engage in different regions and diverse type of businesses.
Great, thanks. And I mean, David's put an open challenge to the group. If any of the organizations here or on the call have any survivors on their staff boards or other leadership teams, if you do, please drop into the chat or drop me an email, because we would love to hear more about that. And David, I will pass that information on to you too. I guess finally, we have a lot of really great businesses and organizations on the call here today. So to both of you, Claudio and Alice, are there any kind of final words, final kind of call to action that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, absolutely. We put a question here: are you ready? Are you the next business to take this journey forward, to set up a survivor empowerment program? We hope we gave you a few points of reference there, where to start, where to look for, what it means. But again, we're happy to talk and discuss with you more in depth how to take this further with your business. How do we tailor, how we help you set up? So please reach out to our organization, GBCAT, Mekong Club, BSR. Get involved, reach out to us, and we will be happy to discuss how we can direct to organizations on the ground in the field that they can help you on this journey. Again, you're not alone on this. All it matters, it's the good, positive resolve to invest in this. And businesses can really be a catalyst of change, can really make impactful change here. They can provide those fundamental critical opportunities. So get engaged and partner with these great service providers out there, survivors organizations that'll be able to support you.
Great, thank you. And I see, Alice, you've shared your information in the chat. I really hope this is the first conversation of many on this topic between our organizations. Thank you both so much for sharing. It's been a really informative, very practical session. And it's great to see the work that's already being done in this space. We certainly second that call to action. For those of you in our network, do feel free to reach out to us at the Mekong Club. We will be sending a recording of this session along with some additional materials after we close up. Thank you all so much for joining and for your excellent questions as well. We really value your feedback on these webinars and these sessions. So when the Zoom closes, a short survey will pop up. If you have the time, please fill it out and give us your feedback and your suggestions. With that, thank you guys at BSR. Thank you everyone for joining and have a great day ahead.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. That was a pleasure.